There is a specific, penetrating kind of coldness that exists only in the homes of the ultra-wealthy. It is a chill that radiates not from the harsh Chicago winters outside, but from the imported Italian marble floors, the echoing vaulted ceilings, and the vast, unbridgeable spaces between the people who reside within those walls. It is the coldness of perfection, of appearances maintained at all costs, where every smile is calculated and every word is weighed for its social value. I grew up suffocating in that coldness. My name is Sarah Kensington, and for 32 years, I have been the invisible, unappreciated, load-bearing pillar of my family's empire. My older brother, Mark, was the soaring, gilded spire. The Kensington family made its fortune in Midwest logistics. Kensington Freight was a sprawling, multi-billion-dollar empire of warehouses, interstate trucking routes, maritime shipping containers, and complex supply chains built from the ground up by my father, Arthur Kensington. He started with one used truck and a loan from a bank that almost didn't believe in him. He built it with grit, with sleepless nights, and with a ruthless understanding that business is war. To the outside world, my father was a titan of industry, a self-made man featured on the covers of Forbes and Fortune. He was the man you wanted to be, the man you wanted to shake hands with. To me, he was a harsh, exacting, emotionally impenetrable man who measured love, loyalty, and human worth purely in profit margins, quarterly growth, and public prestige. Affection was never freely given. It was a currency you had to earn. And even then, the exchange rate was never fair. And by his rigid metrics, Mark was his absolute masterpiece. Mark was 5 years older than me, blessed with our mother's striking, aristocratic features, an effortless, predatory charisma, and the kind of aggressive, unearned confidence that corporate boardrooms so often mistake for genius. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with hair that always looked perfectly styled, and a smile that could sell ice to Eskimos. He went to Wharton on our father's dime, joined all the right fraternities, and partied harder than anyone else in his class. He drove custom Porsches, collected expensive watches, and spoke entirely in hollow corporate buzzwords: synergy, paradigm shifts, leveraging assets, disruptive innovation. He wore custom-tailored Tom Ford suits that cost more than our dock workers made in a year. When Mark entered the family company at 24, he was immediately handed the title of Vice President of Strategic Initiatives. It was a title that sounded incredibly important, but had no defined job description. Essentially, it meant go out, play golf, meet people, and look impressive. He spent his days wining and dining high-net-worth clients at Michelin star restaurants, attending galas, and eagerly taking credit for the company's continuous quarterly gains. If a deal went well, Mark announced it was his vision. If a deal went badly, it was an operational issue. I, on the other hand, went to a state university. I chose the University of Illinois because it had one of the best supply chain management programs in the country, and because I knew my father would only pay tuition for a private school if it was for Mark. I studied accounting, forensic finance, and every technical aspect of the business I could get my hands on. I didn't want the glamour. I wanted to understand how the blood flowed through the veins of the empire my father built. I wanted to know every bolt, every route, every contract. When I entered the family business, my father didn't give me a corner office. He put me in the basement of our Chicago headquarters, literally. I was given the unglamorous title of Director of Operations. While Mark occupied the glass-walled suite on the top floor with the view of Lake Michigan, I worked on a floor with no windows, surrounded by filing cabinets, server racks, and the constant hum of HVAC systems. But that was where the work got done. I was the one who woke up at 3 a.m. when a sudden union strike threatened to shut down our primary distribution hub in Detroit. I was the one who sat across from angry union leaders for 14 straight hours until we reached an agreement that saved us millions. I was the one who meticulously audited the fleet maintenance logs, discovering that our previous manager had been buying cheap, counterfeit parts that were destroying our trucks. I renegotiated predatory diesel fuel contracts, saving the company nearly $12 million annually. During the 2008 recession, when everyone else was panicking, I restructured our routes, cut waste, and kept the company from bleeding out and going bankrupt. I knew the names of the forklift drivers, the dispatchers, and the mechanics. I knew their kids' names, their problems, their strengths. I worked 80-hour weeks in tailored slacks and sensible flats, my eyes burning from staring at Excel spreadsheets until the numbers blurred into a gray sludge. I was the grease in the engine. Mark was the shiny hood ornament. Sarah just doesn't have the vision for executive leadership, my father would often say during our tense Sunday family dinners. These dinners were rituals, stiff and formal, held at the massive mahogany table that could seat 20 people, though usually only 4 of us sat there. He would swirl his expensive scotch, the amber liquid catching the dramatic light of the dining room chandelier, casting deep, cinematic shadows across his stern face. "She's a worker bee, Eleanor. She's good with details, good with the minutiae. But Mark is a king. Mark sees the horizon." My mother, Eleanor, a woman who had traded her own ambitions for the comfort of country club memberships and charity galas, would simply nod, slicing her filet mignon with perfect precision. She was beautiful, icy, and entirely focused on status. She loved Mark because he was an extension of her own image, polished, admired, central. She tolerated me because I was useful. "Don't be too hard on her, Arthur," she would say smoothly. "Someone has to do the paperwork. Besides, Sarah likes being useful." Those words used to sting me. Likes being useful. As if my life's highest aspiration was to be the tool that kept the machine running while others took the credit. I accepted my role. For years, I swallowed the bitter, jagged pill of being the overlooked, undervalued daughter because I genuinely loved the company. I loved the intricate puzzle of making 3,000 trucks move across the country seamlessly. I loved the efficiency, the logic, the sheer scale of it. I convinced myself that my father's quiet, unspoken reliance on my operational competence was its own twisted form of love. I thought that as long as the company thrived, as long as the name Kensington remained powerful, my sacrifices were worth it. I told myself that one day he would see it. One day he would turn from Mark, look at me, and finally say, "You did this. You built this." But the fragile illusion of family loyalty shattered completely 6 months before my father's 71st birthday. That was when I learned the terrible truth in this family. Competence was not a virtue, it was a threat. It was late November. A brutal blizzard was battering Chicago, howling against the reinforced glass windows of the Kensington Freight headquarters. Snow piled high against the streets, turning the city into a white, silent fortress. It was 11:45 p.m. on a Friday. The entire executive suite, including Mark, had left for a ski trip to Aspen 3 days ago. They were drinking expensive wine and skiing fresh powder while I was alone in the building, conducting a routine, end-of-year audit of our Q3 vendor payouts. The office was dead silent, illuminated only by the harsh blue glow of my dual monitors. The heater hummed a low, monotonous tune. I had a thermos of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. I was cross-referencing a series of massive, 7-figure payments designated under the vague category of external consulting fees. This category always annoyed me. It was a catch-all bucket where things went when people didn't want to explain exactly what the money was for. Usually, it was minor consulting, legal fees, or market research, but the numbers I was seeing now were different. They were too big, too consistent, too smooth. That was when I noticed the first anomaly. A company named Apex Solutions LLC had been receiving monthly payments of $450,000 for the past 2 years, every single month, without fail. No delays, no adjustments, no questions asked. I clicked to open the attached invoices. They were incredibly vague, almost comically so: logistical restructuring advisement, market synergy analysis, strategic overhead optimization, supply chain ecosystem evaluation. It was total corporate gibberish. Words strung together to sound important but mean absolutely nothing. I frowned, bringing the cold coffee to my lips. Kensington Freight had an in-house strategy team of 20 highly educated analysts. We didn't outsource logistics consulting, especially not for nearly $500,000 a month. Even the biggest firms in New York didn't charge that much for what these invoices described. Curiosity turned to suspicion. I dug deeper into our internal accounting software, navigating through layers of security clearance I had access to because I was the only one who actually knew how to use the system properly. I pulled the wire transfer receipts. The routing numbers didn't match our usual vetted offshore vendors or domestic partners. I ran a trace on the destination bank. My stomach dropped. The money was being funneled into a private wealth management bank in the Cayman Islands, a jurisdiction famous for secrecy, for hiding assets, for protecting money that people didn't want traced. This wasn't consulting. This was a pipeline. Suspicion led to a deep, obsessive dive into the corporate registry. For the next 3 weeks, I lived at the office. I slept on the small couch in my office. I lived on espresso and adrenaline. I traced shell companies through Delaware, Nevada, and the Caymans. I used every forensic accounting trick my professors had taught me, hacking through layers of digital obfuscation, blind trusts, and proxy directors. It was a labyrinth designed to exhaust anyone who tried to follow the money. It was messy, complicated, and intentionally confusing. But whoever built it underestimated one thing: my sheer, stubborn endurance. I had spent my whole life proving I belonged by working harder than everyone else. I wasn't going to stop now. On a Tuesday at 2 a.m., amidst piles of printed spreadsheets and empty energy drink cans, I finally cracked the final layer of the Shell Corporation. I followed the ownership chain, peeled back the fake names, the registered agents, the layers of legal protection. And there it was. Apex Solutions, LLC wasn't a consulting firm. It was a ghost entity, a company that existed only on paper, with no office, no employees, no services rendered. And its sole owner and primary beneficiary was Mark Kensington. My breath caught in my throat. The numbers stared back at me, damning and irrefutable. My brother wasn't just taking credit for my hard work. He was systematically, ruthlessly embezzling millions of dollars from Kensington Freight. He was bleeding our family's legacy dry to fund his lavish lifestyle, his rumored high-stakes gambling debts in Macau, and a secret, highly leveraged commercial real estate venture in Dubai that had gone horribly wrong. But that wasn't even the worst part. As I pulled the corporate loan documents attached to the embezzled funds, my blood ran ice cold. Mark hadn't just stolen company revenue. That was bad enough. But it was theft. This was worse. This was destruction. He had manipulated the board of directors, charming them, confusing them with jargon, using Dad's name as leverage into restructuring the company's massive debt liabilities. He had moved the debt from the corporate entity to my father's personal retirement accounts and equity holdings. He had essentially used Dad's personal fortune as collateral for the company's loans. If Kensington Freight went under, which, at this aggressive rate of internal theft, it absolutely would, within 18 months the corporate shield would fail. The bank wouldn't just take the trucks or the warehouses, they would come for Arthur Kensington. He would be personally bankrupt. He would lose the mansions, the investments, the art collection, everything he had built over 40 years. Mark, meanwhile, would walk away with over $14 million safely hidden in offshore accounts, entirely legally insulated. He was preparing a golden parachute for himself, woven from the threads of our father's financial ruin. He was burning down the house to keep himself warm. My first, panicked instinct was to print the spreadsheets, drive straight to my father's estate, and slam the evidence on his mahogany desk. I imagined the shock, the rage, the gratitude. I imagined him finally seeing Mark for what he was, and realizing I was the one who had saved him. But I stopped, my hand hovering over the print button. I closed my eyes and played out the scenario. I knew my family. I knew how this dynamic worked. If I went to Arthur Kensington with a stack of papers, he wouldn't believe me. Or worse, he wouldn't want to believe me. He would call it an accounting error. He would accuse me of being bitter, of trying to sabotage my brother out of deep-seated jealousy because I wasn't the favorite. Mark would put on his tailored suit, walk into the room, flash his charismatic smile, and talk his way out of it. He would gaslight me, claim I was misinterpreting complex tax strategies or legal asset protection structures. And before the day was over, I would be the one fired for illegally accessing executive financial files. My father's blind spot for Mark was absolute. He only saw what he wanted to see. And then there was my mother. Eleanor worshipped Mark. She viewed him as her achievement, her social ticket. If she had to choose between the truth and preserving the image of her perfect family, she would bury the truth 6 feet under and plant roses on top. No, if I was going to expose the golden child, I couldn't just tell my father. I couldn't just show him privately. I had to show him in a way that Mark couldn't lie his way out of. I had to show everyone. The board members, the investors, the elite social circle that validated my father's ego. I needed a stage so grand, so public, that the truth could not be swept under a Persian rug. I had to wait for the biggest night of the year, Dad's 75th birthday gala. I spent the next month gathering everything. I wasn't just collecting data. I was building an airtight case. I worked late nights, tracked the IP addresses, cross-referenced bank codes, and even managed to mirror a portion of Mark's encrypted drive when he left his laptop unlocked during a company retreat. I had it all. The emails, the contracts, the signature cards, the flow of funds. I saved everything onto a single, silver flash drive. It was my weapon. It was the truth. But in my focus on the big picture, I made a fatal mistake. I became too visible. Mark wasn't just a pretty face. He was arrogant. Yes, but he was also paranoid and cunning. He noticed the subtle changes in the ledger access logs. He noticed that I had been pulling files from archives I never touched before. He noticed that I was staying later, that I was quieter, that I wasn't laughing at his jokes anymore. He sensed a threat, and Mark's instinct when threatened was to strike first, hard and dirty. 2 weeks before Dad's 71st birthday, I was called into the main boardroom. It was a room I rarely entered. A long, glossy table sat in the center, surrounded by high-backed leather chairs. The walls were lined with awards, photos of Dad with presidents and billionaires, symbols of our power. My father sat at the head of the table. His hands were clasped together, his face like stone. Mark stood beside him, looking sorrowful, almost tearful, like a man bearing a heavy burden. And sitting in the corner, looking calm, composed, and deeply disappointed, was my mother, Eleanor. "Sit down, Sarah," Dad said. His voice wasn't angry. It was worse. It was dismissive, cold, final. "We have a serious matter to discuss." Mark stepped forward, holding a stack of papers. My papers. Copies of the files I had been accessing. "Sarah," Mark began, his voice dripping with fake sympathy, sounding heartbreakingly genuine. "I didn't want to do this. I told Dad and Mom that surely there was a mistake. Surely my sister wouldn't jeopardize the family business. Surely she wouldn't try to undermine everything we've built." "Jeopardize?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs, confused and terrified. "What are you talking about, Mark? I've been reconciling the Q3 accounts." "Internal audit flagged your activity," Mark said, shaking his head slowly, looking at me with eyes that said, "I wish you hadn't done this. You've been downloading massive amounts of sensitive financial data, files regarding our offshore holdings, our debt structures, proprietary formulas. You've been digging where you don't belong." And look at this. Attempts to alter vendor payment records. He slid a document across the table toward me. It looked exactly like my spreadsheet. Same fonts, same formatting. But the numbers had been changed. He had doctored the files. He had taken the records showing his payments to Apex Solutions and altered them to look like I was the one routing funds to a personal account. Mark, those are altered. I have the originals. I reached for my bag to pull out my drive. Stop, my father commanded. He slammed his hand on the table, a sound like a gunshot that froze me in place. Security found this plugged into your workstation this morning. He held up a small, identical silver flash drive. My blood turned to slush in my veins. We ran a check, Dad continued, his voice devoid of emotion. It contained malicious software. Sarah. Programs designed to route inquiries to accounts in the Cayman Islands. The same location you've been investigating. The same location these altered records point to. It was a setup. A perfect, vicious setup. He planted the evidence while I slept. He used my own investigation to frame me. He took the trail I was following and painted my footprints all over it. Dad, please, listen to me. He is the one. Enough. My father stood up, his face red with rage. I defended you, Sarah, for years. I listened to concerns that you were too rigid, too aggressive, too focused on the small things. I told everyone you were just a hardworking girl who didn't understand the big picture. I told them you were loyal. But this, trying to create chaos, making wild accusations, manipulating data, it's destructive. You're bitter because Mark is the heir, and you're not. You're bitter because you work hard, but he gets the glory. It's not true, I screamed, tears finally spilling over. I turned to her. I turned to the only other person in the room who knew me since I was born. Mom, please, you know me. You know I would never hurt this company. You know I don't care about the glory. I care about us. My mother looked at me. Her expression was not sad. It was cold, calculated. She looked at my father, then at Mark, and finally at me. There was no warmth in her eyes, not even a flicker of doubt. I'm afraid the facts speak for themselves. Sarah, she said softly, her voice smooth and composed, sounding exactly like a mother heartbroken by her child's failure. I always worried you were too obsessed with the details, too focused on finding problems where none exist. Perhaps you just don't see the strategy behind these things. You're too close to the ground level. Sometimes, financial structures look strange to those who don't have the education to understand them. Her words hit me harder than a slap. She knew, or worse, she didn't care. She preferred Mark. She preferred the image of the perfect family over the truth, and her reaction wasn't hysterical. It was quiet, polite, and lethal. She was helping him bury me. Effective immediately, my father said, his voice final, dead, void of any love I thought existed. You are suspended without pay. You are banned from entering this building. Your key cards are deactivated. And if you set foot near the office or attempt to contact any board member or employee, I will consider it corporate harassment and have you arrested. Do you understand? I stood there, trembling, humiliated, broken. I wasn't the hero with the evidence anymore. I was the disgraced daughter, the troublemaker, the villain in their story. Mark had successfully flipped the script. He made my attempt to save them look like an attack. Get out, Dad whispered. You are distracting us from running this company. I walked out of the headquarters that day, stripped of my title, my access, and my reputation. Mark stood by the window of his corner office, watching me leave, sipping his expensive scotch, wearing that victorious, terrifying smile. I had lost. I had played the game, and I had been destroyed. The truth was buried. The criminal was celebrated, and the birthday gala was in 2 weeks. For the next 14 days, I sat in my small apartment, numb. The news had spread through the corporate world and our social circle. Sarah Kensington investigated for data misuse. Daughter tries to sabotage brother. Friends stopped calling. Neighbors looked away when I walked by. People I had known for years suddenly treated me like I had a disease. I had the truth on my private drive, the real one, the one Mark didn't find, but I had no way to show it. Mark had positioned himself as the savior, and me as the overzealous, jealous sister. He was planning the birthday gala now, fully in charge, fully confident that he had won. He was going to be the star of the night, the devoted son, the undisputed heir. He was going to cement his position forever. But as the days passed, the shock wore off, and the realization hardened inside me. I wasn't just fighting Mark. I was fighting all of them. The father who refused to see, the mother who actively protected her favorite son, the system that rewarded arrogance and punished competence. They had written me off. They had decided my value was zero, that I was disposable. They thought I was defeated. They thought I was broken. They didn't know who raised me. They forgot that while Mark was playing golf, I was fighting unions, fixing disasters, and surviving in the dark. They forgot that I learned resilience from Arthur Kensington himself. I wasn't going to the gala as a daughter. I wasn't going as an employee. I went as the executioner. The night of the birthday gala arrived in a flurry of winter snow and blinding paparazzi camera flashes. The Oakbrook Country Club was a monument to old money, exclusivity, and generational wealth. Massive stone pillars, perfectly manicured grounds, valets in white gloves. It was everything my family loved: expensive, exclusive, and empty. I pulled my modest sedan up to the valet. I wasn't turned away. The invitation had been sent weeks ago, and Mark hadn't thought to revoke it. Too arrogant to believe I would dare show my face. He probably thought I was too ashamed to leave my house. I stepped into the grand foyer. I wore a dress I had kept for years, simple, navy blue, tailored, elegant, but unassuming. It was the same dress I had worn to the board meeting where I was fired. It was my armor. Around my neck, under my coat, I wore nothing, but in my clutch purse the silver flash drive. The real one. The one I kept hidden at home. The grand ballroom was breathtaking, designed by Mark to look like a cinematic set from a Gatsby-esque film. Dramatic. Warm amber spotlights pierced through the dim, moody atmosphere, catching the blinding sparkle of massive crystal chandeliers. Heavy gold-rimmed china sat on tables covered in white linen. A string quartet played softly in the corner. 300 guests milled about politicians, rival CEOs, investment bankers, and socialites. The air smelled of expensive perfume, cigar smoke, and money. I walked in, head high. Whispers followed me. Is that her? The one causing problems. I heard she got fired. I kept my face blank, calm. I had work to do. I saw my father at the head table. He sat at the center, looking regal, proud, completely unaware, holding court with the mayor and a senator. I saw Mark, holding court near the stage, shining, charismatic, the golden boy restored, laughing loudly, drinking champagne. And I saw her, my mother, Eleanor. She looked radiant, draped in silver silk, diamonds dripping from her ears, smiling at Mark with such adoration it made me sick. She looked like a queen, perfectly happy with the kingdom she had helped build, even if it was built on lies. Mark spotted me navigating through the tables. He excused himself from a group of admirers and strutted over, a condescending, predatory smirk playing on his lips. He didn't cause a scene. He was too smart for that. He leaned down close to my ear, feigning a hug, his body blocking me from view so no one could see his expression. "You have some nerve coming here," he whispered, his voice cold and sharp, sending chills down my spine. "Looking for a last payout, Dad is going to announce me as sole CEO tonight. Sarah, the company is mine. The legacy is mine. And you're just a footnote, a cautionary tale about what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you. Enjoy the party, Mark, I replied, my voice perfectly steady, betraying nothing. It's the last one you'll ever have. He laughed softly, patted my shoulder hard almost painfully, and walked away, confident, untouchable. I moved toward the back of the room, unnoticed, blending into the shadows. I knew the layout of this event better than anyone. I knew the AV booth. I knew the tech setup. Mark had taken over planning, but he used my infrastructure. I had set up the standard procedures years ago. As the dinner plates were cleared and dessert was served, the ambient lights in the ballroom suddenly dimmed. A single, dramatic, blinding white spotlight hit the main stage. The room fell silent. It was time. I stood up, smoothing down the front of my navy dress. I walked through the shadows along the edge of the room until I reached the AV booth, hidden behind a black curtain near the side of the stage. The hired technician looked relieved when I told him Mark had asked me to take over the laptop presentation, another small victory for Mark's ego, using me as staff one last time. He stepped aside, letting me sit in the glow of the screen. I pulled the silver flash drive from my purse. It felt incredibly cold, heavy with the truth. I plugged it into the laptop's USB port. I opened Mark's file, a nauseating 60-slide presentation filled with fake, highly edited family memories, stock photos of successful businessmen, and architectural renderings of buildings he had nothing to do with. I minimized it. I opened my drive. I loaded my presentation file. I placed my index finger over the enter key. My hand wasn't shaking. For the first time in weeks, I felt completely, terrifyingly calm. On stage, Mark stepped up to the podium. He tapped the microphone. The sharp thump-thump echoed through the cavernous room. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, friends, and family," Mark began, his voice echoing through the ballroom with practiced, charismatic ease. He had the pacing of a seasoned politician. "We are here tonight to honor a titan, a visionary, a man who taught me everything I know about business, about leadership, and about what it takes to win in a ruthless world. My father, Arthur Kensington." Polite, warm applause rippled through the room. My father sat at his table, a rare, genuinely proud smile softening his harsh features. He raised his glass of scotch to his son. "Growing up," Mark continued, pacing the stage, holding a wireless microphone like a tech CEO launching a revolutionary new product. "Dad was tough. He expected absolute perfection. He didn't just want us to participate in life, he wanted us to dominate it. And I took that lesson to heart. When I stepped up to lead Kensington Freight's strategic division 5 years ago, I knew I had massive shoes to fill. But I looked at the empire my father built, and I said, we can go bigger." He paused for dramatic effect. "Over the last 5 years, I've overseen our global expansion. I've doubled our revenue streams, secured our legacy against aggressive corporate takeovers, and positioned Kensington Freight to be the undisputed king of logistics for the next century." It was a blatant, nauseating lie. Mark had overseen the PR and the marketing brochures. I had secured the revenue through brutal, exhausting, blood, sweat, and tears operational overhauls. I had fired corrupt vendors, streamlined shipping routes, and saved the company from going under, but no one in the room knew that. To them, Mark was the prodigy. "Of course," Mark chuckled, a slick, practiced, malicious sound that made my stomach churn. "Not everyone in the family shares that killer instinct. Sometimes there are those who are more comfortable in the background, who focus on the trees rather than the forest." He shielded his eyes against the spotlight, peering into the shadows toward the back of the room where I stood. A few hundred people turned in their chairs, craning their necks to look. "Ah, there she is. Sarah, Mark said, his tone dripping with patronizing venom, masquerading as sibling banter. I have to give my sister some credit. Folks, she really holds down the fort, while I'm out in Tokyo negotiating mergers, or in London closing multi-million-dollar deals. Sarah is right there in the basement of our Chicago headquarters, making sure the truck drivers have enough coffee and the staplers are fully loaded. She is the best secretary a vice president could ask for. Let's give it up for the little worker bees. Right. More laughter, louder this time. The wealthy elite love nothing more than mocking the working class, even if it's someone's own sister. They applauded politely, amused by the joke. He wasn't just humiliating me, he was humiliating the hundreds of men and women who broke their backs every day to keep his trust fund full. He was mocking the very foundation of the company. But in all seriousness, Mark pivoted, his tone dropping, adopting a fake, emotional resonance. Dad, you built an empire from the dirt, and I promise you, as your son, as your heir, I will protect it. I will guard your legacy with my life. To prove that, I have a special gift for you tonight. A vision of the future. Mark turned slightly and gestured dramatically to the massive 150-inch LED screen positioned behind him on the stage. Sarah, hit the presentation. I want Dad to see the blueprints for the new corporate headquarters we just closed on in Manhattan. Fully funded, debt-free, ready to take Kensington Freight global. He smiled broadly, opening his arms to the crowd, waiting for the applause. He waited for his flashy, expensive architectural renderings to appear on the screen behind him. I looked at my brother, basking in his unearned glory, a thief wearing a velvet crown. I looked at my father, beaming with pride at a son who was secretly destroying him. I looked at my mother, whispering compliments to friends about how brilliant her son was. I took a deep, steadying breath. I pressed enter. The massive LED screen behind Mark flickered to life, illuminating the entire stage in a bright, unforgiving blue light. But it didn't show a gleaming glass skyscraper in Manhattan. It didn't show a corporate logo or a graph of projected growth. It showed a high-resolution scanned image of a bank statement from the Cayman Islands Royal Bank. The text was massive, undeniable, blown up to 15 feet wide. The account was registered under the name Apex Solutions LLC. The current balance read $14,560,000, and right below it, highlighted in a bright, glaring, neon yellow box, was the signature card and the sole authorized signatory, Mark Arthur Kensington. The ballroom fell into a state of absolute, breathless silence. It was the kind of heavy, vacuum-like silence that happens in the split second right before a car crash. The clinking of glasses stopped. The whispering ceased. Forks froze halfway to mouths. On stage, Mark didn't realize what was behind him yet. He was still smiling at the crowd, his arms wide, but the crowd wasn't smiling back. 300 pairs of eyes were locked onto the screen in sheer, unadulterated shock. My father leaned forward in his chair at the VIP table, his brow furrowing in deep confusion, his eyes narrowing as he read the numbers on the screen. Now, the blueprints for this building are state-of-the-art, Mark began, turning around to point at the screen to highlight the architectural features. He froze. His arm dropped slowly, mechanically, to his side. The color drained from his face so fast, he looked like a wax corpse under the dramatic stage lights. He stared at his own signature, blown up to the size of a car. What? What is this? Mark stammered into the microphone, his voice small and pathetic. He looked frantically toward the AV booth. Tech, turn it off. The system is glitching. Turn the screen off. I didn't turn it off. I pressed the right arrow key. The slide transitioned instantly. Now, the massive screen displayed a side-by-side forensic comparison. On the left were Kensington Freight's internal expense reports, showing 50 massive, approved payouts for logistics consulting. On the right were the incorporation documents for Apex Solutions, LLC, proving it was a shell company registered to Mark's home address in Lincoln Park. A low, chaotic murmur broke out across the ballroom. The VIP guests, many of whom were investors, venture capitalists, and board members of our company, began whispering furiously to one another. Some were pulling out their phones, snapping photos of the screen. "Sarah!" Mark yelled, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated panic. The microphone caught his heavy breathing. "Get out here! You hacked this! You falsified this, just like you tried to mess with the files before." I pressed the key one last time. The screen displayed a blown-up, highlighted screenshot of a heavily encrypted email exchange. This was the layer beneath the crime. This was the truth I had found buried deep in the server logs, written in the language of people who thought they were untouchable. From Eleanor Kensington to Vance Legal Offshore, subject RE asset protection and restructuring. Arthur is becoming too rigid. He refuses to diversify. If we don't move assets now, the estate tax will erase half of everything when he passes. Mark's plan to restructure debt onto the personal holdings is the only viable way to secure the family wealth long term. I've reviewed the contracts. Arthur won't read the fine print anyway. As for Sarah, she will never stop digging. You know how she is. She thinks rules apply to everyone. We need to neutralize her influence before she creates a scandal and destroys everything we have built. Make sure she is kept far away from the financial side of things permanently. The silence that followed was heavier than lead. It wasn't a confession of evil. It was cold logic. It was a mother admitting she knew exactly what was happening, that she approved of stealing the assets, and that she viewed her own daughter, the only honest one, as the problem to be solved. I unlocked the AV booth door, pulled the silver flash drive from the laptop, and stepped out from behind the black curtain, out into the light. The cinematic spotlight that had been illuminating Mark seemed to pale in comparison to the sheer radioactive tension radiating through the room. I walked slowly down the center aisle, moving from the back of the room toward the front stage. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. Politicians, billionaires, and socialites stepped out of my way, staring at me with a mixture of awe and absolute terror. No one spoke. No one dared to breathe. I stopped at the edge of the stage. My father was standing now. Arthur Kensington didn't look like a titan of industry anymore. He looked like an old, broken man who had just watched his entire world shatter into dust. His chest heaved as he stared at the emails on the screen, reading the words over and over again. Secure the family wealth. Neutralize her influence. Destroys everything we have built. He looked at Mark. Mark was hyperventilating, gripping the podium with white knuckles, sweating profusely. He looked at Eleanor. She wasn't crying. She wasn't pleading. She was sitting perfectly still, her face pale, her eyes cold and calculating, just like they had been at the board meeting. She wasn't sorry she did it. She was only sorry she got caught. "You used me," my father said, his voice a raspy, fragile whisper that somehow carried across the dead silent room. "You used my son. You used my company. You treated my daughter like an obstacle to be removed. Dad, I swear to God, she hacked my computer. She fabricated those emails." Mark pleaded, tears welling in his eyes. "Shut up," my father said, raising a trembling hand. He didn't roar. The betrayal was too deep for anger. It was a profound, hollow, devastating grief. "My lawyers and the forensic auditors will be at your house at 7 a.m. tomorrow. Eleanor, pack your bags. You will leave my house by morning, and you will never speak to me or anyone in this family again." Mark collapsed to his knees, sobbing openly, tears and snot running down his face. But no one moved to comfort him. The golden boy had fallen. The Queen Mother was dethroned. His trophy wife, Jessica, was already gone. having quietly slipped out the back doors when the offshore accounts appeared on the screen. My father slowly turned away from the stage. He walked down the aisle and stopped directly in front of me. The imposing patriarch looked at me with a complex, swirling mix of shame, exhaustion, and a heavy, painful realization. He didn't magically hand me the keys to the kingdom. 30 years of bias couldn't be erased in 5 minutes. But the illusion was finally, irreversibly broken. "Sarah," he said, his voice cracking. "The evidence on that drive. Is it fully verified?" "Yes, Dad," I said quietly. "I have the IP logs, the routing numbers, the originals, everything Mark accused me of. It was him. He planted the files. She helped him." He swallowed hard, looking suddenly incredibly frail. "The corporate leverage. Can you untangle it? Can you save my equity before the banks notice? It will be a nightmare," I replied honestly, maintaining my composure. "It will take months of restructuring and cutting costs, but yes, I can save it." My father gave a slow, defeated nod. "Call an emergency board meeting for 8 a.m. tomorrow. I am suspending Mark indefinitely. Eleanor is removed from all family trusts and accounts." He looked into my eyes, a silent apology resting in the heavy bags under his own. "Be at the office at 6 a.m. Sarah, you run the show now." 6 months later, the dust had finally settled, but the landscape of our family was forever changed. Mark was indicted on multiple federal charges of wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and tax evasion. He was fighting a losing legal battle, living in a small, rented condo after his wife took half of his remaining assets in a brutal, highly publicized divorce. The society friends who had toasted him at the country club now pretended they had never met him. My mother, Eleanor, disappeared from the social circuit. She lives quietly in a small apartment in Florida, cut off from the fortune she tried to restructure for herself. People still talk about it in whispers, how she didn't steal out of greed, but out of a cold, calculated belief that she was just managing things better. It made her seem even colder, more real, and more hated. My father never fully recovered from the heartbreak. The betrayal aged him 10 years in a matter of months. A month after the gala, he officially stepped down as CEO, citing health reasons. He spent his days in his study, alone, rarely speaking to anyone. But I didn't stay in the basement. The board recognized exactly who had uncovered the fraud, who had survived the smear campaign, and who possessed the intricate operational knowledge to keep the company from sinking into the abyss. I wasn't handed the company on a silver platter. I wouldn't have wanted it that way. Instead, after weeks of rigorous vetting and presenting my restructuring plan, I was officially appointed as the Chief Operating Officer of Kensington Freight. I spend my days in the penthouse now. I work grueling hours, untangling the financial mess, renegotiating with banks, and rebuilding the company piece by piece. I am earning my empire, not through blind favoritism or gender bias, but through undeniable, battle-tested competence. And it was during this process, while going through old records and contracts as part of the restructuring, that I found the last piece of the puzzle, the one detail that broke me more than anything else. I was looking through files dated 5 years ago, the very first payments to Apex Solutions, LLC, the very beginning of the scheme, buried deep in a folder labeled Strategic Planning, Approved. I found a memo. It was written by my father, dated years before I ever started investigating. Internal memo. Arthur Kensington, Apex Solutions Engagement. Mark presented this structure. It is aggressive, legally sound, and moves assets out of direct exposure. I know he is using these funds to cover his personal losses and lifestyle. I know he is draining cash flow. I know Sarah will eventually notice, and she will try to stop it because she believes the rules apply to everyone. But Mark is my son. He is my name. He is the face I want the world to see. Sarah is the engine. Yes, and she is brilliant. But she is heavy, serious, too grounded. She reminds people of work, of trucks, of grit. Mark reminds people of success, of elegance, of power. I built this company to give my son the world. If saving the legacy means letting Mark take what he needs, even if it means Sarah has to work twice as hard, or carry the burden, or even be the one who takes the blame when things go wrong, then that is the price of the dynasty. Sarah is strong. She can handle it. Mark is fragile. He needs me. Let the payments continue. If Sarah objects, frame it as her inability to understand high-level finance. She will survive it. He might not. I sat in the empty office, holding the paper, the silence stretching out around me. He knew. He knew from the very start. He knew Mark was stealing. He knew Mark was incompetent. He knew the plan to leverage his own assets. And he didn't just allow it. He approved it. He designed it. He wasn't blind. He wasn't fooled. He looked at his two children, one who gave everything, one who took everything, and he made a cold, calculated choice. He chose Mark, not because Mark was better or smarter or more worthy, but because Mark was his dream, and I was just his reality. He loved the idea of Mark more than he loved me. He was willing to let me be humiliated, framed, cast out, and destroyed, just to protect the illusion of his perfect son and his perfect legacy. The betrayal wasn't just from Mark. It wasn't just from Mom. The betrayal was systemic. It was woven into the very fabric of our family. They didn't just try to bury me. They used me as the dirt to cover up their sins. I didn't cry. I had no tears left. I just put the memo back in the folder, locked it away, and went back to work. They tried to bury me. They tried to frame me. They tried to label me as the problem. They used me, sacrificed me, and lied to me for decades. But they forgot one thing: I wasn't just the shadow. I was the foundation. And while shadows fade, and while dreams crumble, foundations last forever. I run the company now. I built it back up from the wreckage they created. I carry the name Kensington, but I stripped it of their lies, their arrogance, and their cruelty. And every time I look out the window of the penthouse office, watching thousands of trucks moving across the country, generating billions in revenue, I know the truth. They thought I was the worker bee. But the worker bee is the one who builds the hive. And without her, the queen and the drones have nothing. This is my empire now. And I built it on the truth they tried so hard to hide.